If you have high cholesterol or you want to know more about what it means and doesn't really affect your cardiovascular system like they say it do, and if it does, how do you deal with it? Well, this is what we're going to talk about today. I'm Trevor Chakouti from SpineWise, and I want to go in depth with you about the different types of cholesterol and what they actually mean, and let you into a few secrets that you may not actually be aware of. All right, so let's get to it. So let's start with the basics about what cholesterol actually is, because not many people actually know, and we think this is fatty substance that actually sits in the bloodstream, and it's not actually that simple. The other big misconception is that cholesterol is bad for us, but we actually need cholesterol for a whole lot of different functions in the human body. Let's start with what cholesterol actually is. So cholesterol is a fatty substance. Okay, it's kind of like a waxy type substance that we find in most foods. Okay, and it is a very important part of food, helps give us flavor and a whole lot of other things. So we see this in various forms of proteins, especially so things like even eggs, relatively high in cholesterol. And this actually has a lot of good benefits. But one thing we need to be aware of is that we don't actually have cholesterol free floating in our bloodstream. We can't have fat in our bloodstream. You see, if you go back and you think about it, water and fat don't actually mix. So if you were to have fat in your bloodstream, the problem with that would be that you have all these little bubbles occurring everywhere in your bloodstream, and eventually they'd get stuck in certain small areas in vessels and potentially start giving you strokes. And we see this with things such as fat emboli that occur from certain bones that can be broken. So this is one of the key things we need to understand, is that that standard fat that you've been told about that just ends up in your bloodstream is not actually how it works. So how it actually works is, when we look at cholesterol, we have our little cholesterol molecule here, and that cholesterol molecule needs to be transported to different areas of your body. I'm going to talk about why that is in a second. But one of the things that we have to do is, to get it transportable, we need to make sure that it's in a format that we can put into the bloodstream and not actually result in death. So what we do is we bind it to what's known as a carrier protein. And a carrier protein basically is like a bus. We pick up all the cholesterol, we put it into it, we close the doors, and then we transport it to where we need it. And then once we work out where we need it, we open the doors and we let it out to do its thing. And by doing that, it's like having kids on a bus. You can transport them from one suburb to another suburb, or from home to school, without the risk of them being hit by cars. So cholesterol works the same way. We need to put them into a transport vehicle in order to move them from one area where we take them in to the area we actually need them. So this is all done via carrier protein. So what you consume cholesterol-wise is not actually what ends up in your bloodstream. It's actually altered and manufactured. In fact, what we do know is that if you were to eliminate all the cholesterol in your diet completely, you'd still probably end up only reducing your cholesterol counts by somewhere around 1/4 to 1/3. Okay, so we need to start understanding that we actually manufacture cholesterol in the human body itself, and the big place we manufacture that is within your liver. So it's in the liver that we tend to bind these fats into the proteins to allow for distribution to the bloodstream. And these proteins are what we call lipoproteins, or fat proteins. Lipo meaning fat, and the protein, lipoproteins. And you probably have heard this without really being aware of it, because when we start talking about cholesterol, we speak about HDLs and LDLs, and these are high density lipoproteins and low density lipoproteins. And when we start binding them together, we end up with these big particle high density lipoproteins, and we end up with smaller particle low density lipoproteins. Okay, and these things are really, really important once they're bound. These things actually have different functions within the human body. And let's get to that. So let's look at, why do we actually need it to begin with? What are the functions? Why do we need cholesterol? Because you've probably been told that cholesterol is bad, and the lower your cholesterol is, the better it is for you, and nothing could be more further from the truth. Okay, these are lies. These aren't true. These are often misconceptions about cholesterol. So there are a lot of different tasks about cholesterol, a lot of different things it does in the body, but there are 3 really key things it does in the human body that are important for us. So one, all of your steroidal hormones, these sexual hormones, reproductive hormones, and stress hormones are all derived from cholesterol. So if we have lower levels of cholesterol, the problem is we start actually depleting our reproductive hormones and our stress hormones, and these can have a widespread effect on human function, from brain function to reproductive health. A whole lot of different things can happen if these start dropping off. Next thing is we use cholesterol to produce bile salts. And bile salts are the things that your gallbladder has stored in it that it releases into your digestive system to help emulsify fats, to help break these fats down. And this is really, really important for us because it's these fat-soluble vitamins that help give us vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. So without having these proper bile salts to break these fats down and absorb them correctly, we find we start struggling with these vitamins as well. And some of these are really important. So for example, we know vitamin K is really important in cardiovascular health and bone health. We know vitamin D is really important in bone health as well. So this process of having enough cholesterol to produce our bile salts is actually a really important substance. As we move further down, we then move into vitamin D itself. And strangely enough, yes, vitamin D is actually produced from cholesterol. So you may be thinking that vitamin D comes from the sun. Well, that's not actually true because you can't produce a physical chemical from light. It just doesn't happen. You can't do that. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of these things in particular. We're going to leave the bile salts alone because this is a bit more of a complicated action. We're going to leave that one alone. So what we're going to talk about are our hormones and our vitamin D function. These are the two big ones we want to talk about because these are really, really critical for human health. So let's break it down. So let's start with cholesterol itself. So we have this cholesterol floating around the bloodstream, and this gets utilized by a whole lot of different areas. And this situation gets utilized by your adrenal glands to produce our hormones. And the big ones we're looking at here, first of all, is a hormone called pregnenolone. And pregnenolone is a precursor to all of our stress hormones and our reproductive hormones. And this process occurs by some of our other hormones that occur naturally within the brain and the like. But we know, for example, that our chloride ions, our salts, are really important in actually converting cholesterol across to pregnenolone. And this is part of the reason why a lot of people will start craving salt when we're under a lot of stress. What we're really trying to do is upregulate pregnenolone so we can produce more stress hormones to survive that moment in time. Then when we get through our pregnenolone, this gets broken down. I've simplified this a little bit for you, but it gets broken down into three main areas, and they are progesterone, cortisol, and DHEA. So progesterone, as the name says, is pro-gestation. Progesterone really is all about pregnancy and maintaining pregnancy. Cortisol is our main stress hormone. It sensitizes our receptors in our cells to our flight or fight responses. So it makes our flight or fight responses more functional. So it means we can produce the same level of stress and protection with kind of less effort from our brain and our autonomic nervous system. So cortisol is really critical in that whole survival process, where DHEA really is our precursor to cellular growth. We stimulate testosterone and estrogen, which are really important to repair and regenerate every day. But a lot of these things as well, if we go further than these things are also associated with brain health. So in women, progesterone sensitizes the receptors for serotonin. So if you're having problems with anxiety, maybe you're having problems with making decisions, lacking joy in life, maybe you have OCD. These are things that are often associated with progesterone deficiencies. And it may not be that you're low in progesterone as a female, it might just be that your progesterone levels are lower. So that's giving you the symptom of low serotonin, and not actually that you are truly low in serotonin. And this is quite common for women who start having these emotional issues in terms of anxiety and aggressiveness and these type of things heading into your period. Estrogen is another one really important, especially in women. So it sensitizes the receptors for dopamine, our do hormone, the one that gets us motivated to do things. But we also know estrogen is responsible for stimulating our limbic system, our emotional centers as well. And testosterone, if you're a male, testosterone helps everything in the male brain. And this is the one that we really, really need. So this is where it comes down to. If we have a reduction in the availability of cholesterol, we don't have enough of it, we really can't drive this whole mechanism. So having low cholesterol can be just as damaging as having high cholesterol on our overall health. If we keep moving forward and start looking at vitamin D function, cholesterol in the skin then gets utilized, so the UV light hits that cholesterol in the skin and acts as a catalyst. It doesn't actually create vitamin D, it acts as a catalyst to convert cholesterol into a substance known as vitamin D3. And this D3 is what you generally take in your supplements. D3 then enters the liver, so this happens in our liver again. And in our liver, we hydroxylate it into a substance known as 25-OHD or 25 vitamin D. And this is what we test for in our blood test. And this is our stored form of vitamin D. So if we don't have enough cholesterol available in the skin, we cannot actually produce this 25-OHD. Likewise, if we're having problems in liver function, we can't produce it either. So it becomes really, really critical for overall health. And then on our kidneys, so when we get to our kidneys, the kidneys then convert this 25-OHD, they hydroxylate it again into the usable form of vitamin D that the body actually needs to help your brain health and your bone health and immune health as well. So we can see cholesterol becomes really, really important in vitamin D regulation as well. So we need to swap this whole concept that cholesterol is bad and the lower it is, the better it is for you, because we do actually need cholesterol for a lot of vital structures and a lot of vital functions in the human body. So why do things go bad? Why is it that cholesterol goes from being such a really important good thing for our life to this detrimental thing that causes us to have heart attacks and strokes and all these type of things? Let's look at a few different things. So we just went through hormone patterning. So if we are having problems with hormone availability and production, this starts elevating our cholesterol levels potentially. So for example, if we can't produce cortisol, let's say we don't have the building blocks, let's say we're chloride deficient, we're lacking the hormones that the brain produces to actually stimulate cholesterol conversion into pregnenolone and into our stress hormones, well, that creates a backlog, and that backlog can potentially start elevating cholesterol levels. And we do see this with people who have chronic stress-related disorders. So that's the first one that we want to look at. So stress is a big potential problem in this regard. Liver function is the next one. Remember, we said before that all of our liver function really is derived or is involved in the binding of these cholesterol patterns. If we're not having very healthy liver function or good liver function, then that can alter that binding process and start producing more of these what you've been termed bad cholesterol, which I'll get back to in a second, or good cholesterol, which is our HDLs. Okay, so this is another thing that we need to look at. So changes in liver function can create problems. And we also saw this before with the liver being essential for converting across into that stored form of vitamin D. So this can also potentially create a backlog of cholesterol as well. Digestion is another big interesting one. So you actually absorb the cholesterol from the gut, and we need fiber in the gut to actually bind and remove things. So when we start getting fiber deficient, those processes start becoming a problem. Our probiotics start becoming a problem. This can also lead to issues. Insulin is an enormous one. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about insulin in a second, but insulin we know will affect liver function and actually change that binding process as well. And we also know that thyroid function can have an influence. So we start seeing that there's a lot of different factors involved in changing cholesterol function. It's not just a matter of you've got high cholesterol. This is just unfortunate for you and this is the way your life is. There are a lot of different things that will influence it when we start looking bigger. So what are the real dangers? So if cholesterol's not that bad, what are the real dangers? So let's break it down. So when we look at cholesterol, LDLs you've been told are the bad things. They're the horrid things. But what we really understand from LDLs is that there are actually 7 different types of low density lipoproteins. And out of those 7 types, only about 4 of those actually pose any risk to your cardiovascular system. Okay? So we need to move away from the concept just because you have high LDLs doesn't necessarily mean you'll have a problem. In fact, most of those on a high fat diet will tend to have a lot more elevation in their LDLs, but it tends to be more of these bigger LDL particles that aren't necessarily dangerous. When we start seeing people on very high carb orientated diets with high levels of insulin, these are the people we tend to see have more of the small particle LDLs, which are the ones that really create the problem for us. The next one is a substance called lipoprotein A, and unfortunately this isn't routinely included when we start talking about cholesterol and cardiovascular laboratory assessments. And lipoprotein A has been generally associated as being a genetic issue, so you might have heard you have genetic cholesterol problems, and lipoprotein A is the one that's generally associated with it. But there is also growing evidence to say that lipoprotein A is also potentially an insulin problem, and simply reducing carbohydrate giving liver function under control may actually improve lipoprotein A functionality. The other one that we often talk about, which we see and is a very, very close associations being generated in the literature between it and aneurysms, is homocysteine, and this is again another liver protein. Okay, so we're starting to see a big circle really revolving around liver function when it comes to these cardiovascular issues and cholesterol. And the liver produces a substance called homocysteine to produce all of your detoxification hormones and your antioxidants. So it's a real critical thing. We also use it to produce a substance known as methyl groups, which is a part of a biochemical process known as methylation, which is where a lot of our genetic expression is controlled by, and also it's involved in producing our natural antidepressants. So I've done a whole lot of stuff in methylation pathways previously. You can have a look through them on our pages, but this is one that's really, really important for us. The final one, which is probably one of the most important things on your routine laboratory assessments, is this thing called triglyceride. Okay, now this is really damaging to your cardiovascular system. And what triglyceride is when you consume some form of carbohydrate, and this carbohydrate starts getting broken down. It can get broken down into either immediately usable energy, so this is the now energy, or it can get put into stored energy. And the most common stored energy uses is fat, carbohydrate into storable fats that then you can use when you need energy and you haven't eaten. And the only real fat it can store it as is triglyceride. So when we start seeing elevated levels of triglyceride, this is generally a sign that we have elevated levels of insulin again. And this is really, really critical for us, because the elevated levels of insulin, we know, create fat storage, alter liver function, which alters all of these aspects we're talking about, and we now can say it also alters triglyceride as well. So we start seeing this pattern that cholesterol dysfunction is most commonly associated with things such as insulin resistance. So how can we actually test for these things? What are the things that we can actually look at? So doing a lipofraction test is really important, and this will allow us to test all the 7 forms of those LDL cholesterols. So we can actually work out what are the issues and what aren't the issues, and we can see whether it's these top 3 that are giving the problem or those bottom smaller particle 4s, and start altering the way we see things. The other thing we want to look at, as I said before, is our triglycerides. We want to look at our homocysteine as well. These are both really critical for us in terms of overall functionality. And when we're looking at triglycerides, ideally from what we see here, we really want to have triglycerides under 1. If our triglycerides under 1, that's generally where we know that we're safe. And our homocysteine levels somewhere in the order of 7 to 9. And that's a nice healthy range what we're seeing. But if we start seeing a trend, and the trend we start seeing, HDLs decreasing, LDLs increasing, so they're 2 big ones, triglycerides increasing, fasting glucose levels increasing. This is a trend towards insulin resistance that you're seeing, and this is a trend towards cardiovascular disease in the future. Okay, so these are the kind of things we want to look for on our laboratory tests. And if you have already got cholesterol levels that are high and potentially are a risk for you already, what we really want to be doing then is looking at having a calcium score done. And that calcium score will start looking at whether or not we're starting to get plaquing within the arteries of the heart, and potentially tell you about whether you have a true risk for cardiovascular disease that's occurring right now. All right, so the next step we want to look at is what can we do about all this stuff? We've got all this stuff going on. What can we actually do about it? Because As you can see, there's a whole lot of stuff going on with cholesterol which is actually potentially rectifiable and isn't just a matter of bad luck. Okay, so let's have a few things. So number one, as we've seen before over and over again, is you've got to get your insulin levels down. And insulin really is about carbohydrates. So we need to get the type of carbohydrate under control, moving more towards a low GI, low glycemic based carbohydrates, and then also reducing the total amount of carbohydrate down. So increasing fat, reducing carbohydrate to make sure we get those ratios right. Increase fiber in the diet. So if we increase the fiber in the diet, even if it's taking supplement-based fibers, such as psyllium husks, something like this, increasing fiber will increase binding, improve probiotic health, and help regulate our cholesterol levels better. Increase fat. So really what we're talking about here is the carbohydrate to fat ratio. So we want to make sure our fat intake is up above 55% in our total calorie origins. If we're doing this, that will help protect things. Don't be afraid of fat. I know we all get told you got to avoid fat, fat's bad, that's what's driving cholesterol. As you've seen today, the fat's not so much the issue, it's the insulin dysfunction that's the problem. That's really what we need to be focusing on, is insulin dysfunction. And to do that, we need to control this. So start adding good fats to your diet. Things like olive oil, flaxseed oil are fantastic for these type of things. And also, don't disregard some forms of saturated fat. For example, ghee has had a lot of research on it and shown that it can actually increase your HDLs, reduce your LDLs, and even reduce insulin resistance. So ghee's a really good choice for this type of stuff as well. When it increases liver and gallbladder function, there's a whole lot of things we can do with that. Number one is get your insulin levels under control. There are tons of herbs that work in this way as well. So things like globe artichoke and milk thistle work tremendously well at improving these type of functions as well. We can also take things like bile salts to help with digestive function and the like, but really want to get this stuff up and running and get regeneration and healing back within the liver itself. And we can reduce the absorption of cholesterol to begin with using things like red rice extract. So there's a whole lot of different things that we can do to start improving that. And we can get really specific on these things based upon your presentation and the like, but realistically speaking, a combination of these type of things really goes a long way to improving that. Now there's one other thing I want to talk to you about, and this is really intriguing because the research is early days in this, but it is interesting nonetheless, and that is, if you do have calcium deposition plaquing within the coronary arteries, there is some suggestion happening at the moment that chelating calcium out of that area may actually potentially reverse or reduce that plaquing. Really interesting thought process. So there's a whole lot of different things that have been shown potentially to do that. So chelation therapy via IV, things like EDTA may potentially do it as well. But there's a new up and coming substance which is holding some interest in this area, and that is inositol hexaphosphate, IP6, which is an anti-nutrient commonly referred to as phytic acid. And we see there's some early research on this with things like hemochromatosis in reducing iron levels. A lot of cancers are getting some interesting research with this as well. But the other one that's starting to develop some research on this is in regards to cardiovascular disease and potentially removing the calcium out of that plaquing and reducing that process as well. So I'm not going to say it does or doesn't work, but there is some interesting and intriguing information coming around that area as well. Anyway guys, that's a nice little introduction into cholesterol and what it really does mean for your system and ways that you can deal with it. Hopefully it's gone a little bit of way to just reducing the stress about having a high cholesterol and giving you some options about where you can look, what you can do and how you can go back to getting yourself healthy and changing your potential future. Anyway guys, I'm Trevor Chakouti from SpineWise. If you do have any questions, please like and subscribe, comment down below. My team's always here to help you. Check us out on Facebook. We do a lot of snippets on this type of stuff as well as our Instagram account. And don't be afraid to reach out if you have any questions in any way, shape or form. Bye for now.